Jeff and I had a love story that felt like it was straight out of a movie, until it wasn't. We met in college in California. I was a Midwest girl with big dreams, and Jeff, well, he was the guy who made California feel like home. We were inseparable during our last 2 years of undergrad, making plans for the future, talking about marriage, kids, the whole shebang. After graduation, while I pursued my master's degree, Jeff jumped into the workforce, and we were as happy as could be. Or so I thought. When I finally finished my master's, the plans we had made for marriage suddenly became too real for Jeff. He got cold feet, freaked out about the idea of becoming a husband and father, and just like that, he broke up with me. To say I was devastated would be an understatement. My heart felt like it had been ripped out, stomped on, and thrown into the Pacific. I stayed in California, holding on to the hope that Jeff would realize his mistake and come back to me. But he never did. Instead, he met someone new. Grace. Within 5 months of our breakup, they started dating, and it became clear that what Jeff and I had was really over. My dreams of us reconciling were shattered, and I started making plans to move back to my home state. Just when I thought life couldn't surprise me anymore, Jeff and Grace broke up at the beginning of the year. In a moment of weakness, Jeff and I found our way back to each other a few times. It wasn't long after that last time together that he told me he was getting back with Grace, and that he couldn't be friends with me anymore because he still had feelings for me. To spare Grace's feelings, he told me not to contact him unless it was a matter of life and death. Those words hit hard, but I respected his wishes. I packed up my life in California and moved back to the Midwest, leaving Jeff, Grace, and all our memories behind. 2 weeks after I got home, I found out I was pregnant. And yes, it was Jeff's baby. I wasn't about to use this pregnancy as a way to win Jeff back. So I disappeared, deleted my social media, changed my number, and only kept in touch with a few trusted friends who had no connection to Jeff. I didn't want him to know. I didn't want to disrupt his life with Grace. And frankly, I didn't want the drama. Life went on. I focused on building a life for myself and my baby. I bought a house, started building a nursery, and prepared to raise my child on my own. My family was supportive, and I knew I could do this. But then, I made the mistake of going back to California for a friend's engagement party. It was supposed to be a quick trip, just a chance to see old friends and celebrate before my life became all about diapers and late-night feedings. That's when everything started to unravel. I ran into Jeff's cousin, Tanya, one of those people who just lives for gossip. She saw me and immediately started asking questions. I lied, told her I was pregnant by someone else, and hoped that would be the end of it. But I underestimated Tanya's love for drama. She couldn't wait to tell Jeff. Next thing I know, my phone is blowing up with messages from friends saying that Jeff is desperately trying to get in touch with me. He had learned about the pregnancy, and he was losing it. I didn't want to deal with it, but I knew I had to. We ended up meeting at his parents' house. Me, Jeff, Grace, and a whole lot of tension. The place was still a mess from the party they had thrown for his proposal to Grace. Yes, he proposed to her. The same guy who was too scared to marry me. Now he was ready to tie the knot with someone he hadn't even known as long as he had known me. Jeff was frantic, asking why I hadn't told him about the baby. I reminded him that he was the one who told me not to contact him. He tried to justify it, saying that this was different, that he needed to be in his child's life. But I could see the pain in his eyes when he realized I wasn't coming back to California. I had built a life for myself in the Midwest, and that's where I was staying. Grace was beside herself. She thought I had ruined her proposal, that I was trying to take Jeff away from her. But I wasn't. All I wanted was to move on, to live my life without the shadow of Jeff hanging over me. In the end, Jeff realized there wasn't an easy solution. He couldn't just drop everything and move to be with his child. And I wasn't about to uproot my life for him. We were at an impasse. As much as it hurt, I knew that I had to be strong for my baby. Jeff was going to have to figure out how to be a father from afar. I left that night, feeling a mix of relief and heartbreak. Relief that I had stood my ground, that I hadn't let Jeff pull me back into his orbit. But heartbreak because, deep down, I knew that our story was over. For good. Now, I'm back in the Midwest, focused on preparing for my baby's arrival. I'm ready to be a mom, and I know I can do it on my own. But every now and then, I think about what might have been, and I wonder if Jeff does too. Back in the Midwest, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. The relief came from leaving California behind and putting physical distance between myself and the emotional chaos that was Jeff. But the sadness lingered, like a dull ache in my chest, because I had to confront the reality that the man I once thought I'd spend my life with was now engaged to someone else. I threw myself into preparing for the baby. The nursery became my sanctuary, a place where I could focus on the future and the little life growing inside me. My mom came over to help with painting the walls a soft, calming shade of blue. My sister sent me links to baby furniture, and I spent hours assembling cribs and arranging tiny clothes in the dresser. It was therapeutic, in a way, to plan for this new chapter without Jeff. But Jeff didn't leave my thoughts entirely. As the days passed, I couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. Would he really try to be part of our son's life? Could we possibly co-parent when we lived so far apart and had such different visions for our futures? I tried not to dwell on it, reminding myself that I had made it clear I didn't need anything from him. However, one night, about a week after I returned home, I received a text from an unknown number. I hesitated before opening it, knowing it was likely Jeff. Sure enough, it was. "I can't stop thinking about our son," the text read. "I know I messed up, but I want to be there for him. Can we talk?" I stared at the message, my heart pounding. Part of me wanted to delete it, to continue shutting him out of my life. But another part of me, the part that remembered the good times, the love we once shared, wanted to give him a chance. After all, this was about more than just us now. It was about our child. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I called my mom. She listened patiently as I poured out everything. The pregnancy, the breakup, the encounter with Jeff and Grace, and now this message. "You need to do what's best for you and your baby," she said gently. "If you think Jeff will truly be a good father and can handle this responsibility, maybe it's worth having a conversation. But if he's just going to cause more heartache, you need to protect yourself and your child." Her words echoed in my mind as I sat down at my kitchen table, my phone in hand. I finally typed out a reply. "We can talk, but only if you're serious about being involved. I won't let you come in and out of our son's life when it suits you. He deserves better than that." Jeff responded almost immediately, asking if we could video chat the next evening. I agreed, my stomach twisting in knots at the thought of seeing his face again, even if it was just through a screen. The next day, I tried to focus on work and preparations for the baby, but I was distracted by what lay ahead. When the time for the call finally came, I sat on my bed, laptop open, and took a deep breath as Jeff's face appeared on the screen. "Hey," he said softly. He looked tired, and there was a sadness in his eyes that I hadn't seen before. "Hi," I replied, my voice more steady than I felt. We spent the next hour talking. Jeff apologized again for everything, for breaking up with me, for not being there during the pregnancy, for not reaching out sooner. He said he was scared, but that he had realized he couldn't just walk away from his child. "I want to be a part of his life," Jeff said earnestly. "I know I can't make up for the past, but I want to try." I listened, torn between hope and caution. "I appreciate that, Jeff," I said finally. "But you have to understand that this isn't just about wanting to be there. It's about actually being there. Consistently, and it's going to be hard. We're not in the same place anymore, literally and figuratively." "I know," he admitted, "but I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I don't want our son to grow up without knowing his father." We discussed logistics, how we could visit, how often we'd communicate, and how we'd handle things like holidays and major milestones. It was overwhelming, but by the end of the conversation, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, we could make this work for our son. After we hung up, I sat in silence for a long time, processing everything. I knew this was just the beginning of a long and complicated journey, but I was determined to do what was best for my child. Whether that included Jeff or not, only time would tell. For now, I would keep focusing on the nursery, the upcoming birth, and the life I was building. And whatever happened with Jeff, I knew I'd be okay. I was stronger than I'd ever realized. Weeks passed, and as my due date approached, I found myself both excited and anxious. Jeff and I had continued to communicate, mostly about the baby and what needed to be done. He was more involved than I expected, asking about doctor's appointments, sending suggestions for baby names, and even arranging for some things to be sent to the nursery. It was all very practical, almost businesslike, but there was an undeniable undercurrent of something else. Sometimes, I caught myself wondering what might have been if things had been different. If Jeff hadn't broken up with me, if he hadn't moved on so quickly, if we were still together, excitedly awaiting the birth of our child as a couple. But I quickly pushed those thoughts away. There was no point in dwelling on what couldn't be changed. One afternoon, while I was sorting through baby clothes in the nursery, my phone buzzed with a message from Grace. We hadn't spoken since that disastrous day in California, and I hadn't expected to hear from her again. My heart raced as I opened the message, unsure of what to expect. "Hi, I know this might be strange, but I wanted to reach out," she wrote. "Jeff told me about your conversations, and I just wanted to say, I hope things work out for you and the baby. I don't want to be in the way of that." I stared at the screen, taken aback. Grace's message was unexpectedly kind, and I wasn't sure how to respond. After a moment, I typed back, "Thank you. This is all really complicated, but I appreciate your understanding. I don't want to cause any issues between you and Jeff." She replied quickly, "You're not causing issues. Jeff and I are still figuring things out, but I want him to be involved in his child's life. If there's anything I can do to help make this easier, please let me know." Her words left me feeling conflicted. Grace seemed genuine in her offer to help, but it was strange to think of her being involved in my child's life. This woman, who was engaged to my ex, was offering to support me as I navigated co-parenting with Jeff. It was surreal. As the weeks turned into days, I found myself increasingly preoccupied with thoughts of the birth and what would happen afterward. Jeff had mentioned wanting to be there when our son was born, and while part of me wanted him to be, I couldn't shake the fear that his presence might make things more complicated. I finally brought it up during one of our video calls. "Jeff, I've been thinking about the birth," I began cautiously. "I know you want to be there, but I'm not sure how I feel about it. This is such a vulnerable moment, and with everything that's happened between us." He looked at me with understanding, though there was a hint of disappointment in his eyes. "I get it," he said softly. "I don't want to make things harder for you. If you'd rather I wait, I can do that. But I'll be ready to come as soon as you're comfortable." I appreciated his willingness to put my feelings first, but it didn't make the decision any easier. Maybe you could come after he's born," I suggested, my voice trembling slightly. "Give me a little time to adjust, and then we can figure it out together." Jeff nodded, and we left it at that. But as the days passed, the weight of the decision pressed on me. This was supposed to be a joyous time, but the uncertainty of our situation cast a shadow over everything. Finally, the day came. I went into labor late at night, and my mom drove me to the hospital. As the contractions intensified, I felt a mix of fear and excitement. This was it, the moment I'd been waiting for. But even in the throes of labor, I couldn't completely push thoughts of Jeff aside. Would he have been holding my hand if things were different? Would we be experiencing this together, as a team? The birth was long and exhausting. But when I finally held my son in my arms, everything else melted away. He was perfect, tiny and pink, with a head full of dark hair and big curious eyes. My heart swelled with love, and I knew, in that moment, that I would do anything for him. The next morning, as I rested in the hospital bed with my son sleeping beside me, my phone buzzed with a text from Jeff. "Is he here?" I hesitated for a moment before replying, "Yes, he's here. He's perfect." "Can I come?" he asked. After a brief pause, I typed back, "Yes, you can come." Jeff arrived later that day, looking nervous but determined. When he saw our son, his expression softened, and for a moment, the tension between us disappeared. He reached out to gently touch the baby's tiny hand, his eyes filling with tears. "He's beautiful," Jeff whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "Thank you for letting me be here." I nodded, tears welling up in my own eyes. "He's ours, Jeff. No matter what's happened between us, he's ours." We spent the next few hours together, marveling at the tiny life we created. For a brief moment, it felt like we were a family, united by our love for our son. But as the day wore on, reality began to creep back in. Jeff had to return to California, to the life he built there with Grace. And I had to focus on raising my son, here in the Midwest on my own. Before Jeff left, he made a promise. I'm going to be here for him. For you both. I won't let him down. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that, despite everything, we could make this work. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't be easy. There were still so many unresolved feelings, so much hurt that hadn't healed. And now, there was a little boy who would be caught in the middle of it all. As I watched Jeff walk out of the hospital room, I couldn't help but wonder, would we be able to navigate this new reality? Could we find a way to co-parent without letting our past destroy us? Or would the complexities of our situation eventually tear us apart? Only time would tell. For now, all I could do was take it one day at a time and hope that, somehow, we'd find a way to build a future for our son, no matter what it took. In the days following Jeff's visit, I found myself falling into the rhythm of motherhood. My son, whom I named Ethan, quickly became the center of my world. Sleepless nights and endless diaper changes were exhausting, but each time I looked into his bright eyes, all the fatigue seemed to melt away. There was something so pure, so utterly captivating about him. He was a part of me, a tiny, perfect being who depended on me for everything. Yet, even as I poured myself into caring for Ethan, I couldn't escape the thoughts of Jeff. His promise to be there for us echoed in my mind, but I knew the reality would be far more complicated. Jeff was still in California, still engaged to Grace, and the distance between us, both physical and emotional, felt insurmountable at times. One evening, after Ethan had finally drifted off to sleep, I sat on the couch, scrolling through my phone. Jeff had been texting me regularly, asking for updates on Ethan, sharing little stories about his day, and even sending pictures of the nursery he was setting up in California. It was clear he was trying, and I appreciated the effort, but it also made things harder. Every message from Jeff was a reminder of what we could have had, of the life we might have built together if things had been different. I knew I needed to focus on the present, on Ethan, but it was difficult when the past kept creeping in. As I sat there, my phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Grace. "Hey, I hope you're doing okay," she wrote. "I've been thinking about you and the baby. Jeff talks about Ethan all the time. He's so excited to be a dad. I just wanted to check in and see if there's anything you need." I stared at the screen, feeling a mixture of surprise and confusion. Grace's messages were always kind, but they also felt strangely intrusive. It was as if she was trying to insert herself into a situation that, in many ways, wasn't hers to be involved in. "Thanks, Grace," I replied, choosing my words carefully. "We're doing okay. Just getting used to everything. I appreciate you checking in. I know this is all really complicated," she responded quickly. "But I want you to know that I support Jeff being involved with Ethan. If there's anything I can do to help make things easier for you, please let me know." I hesitated before typing back. "I appreciate that, really. It's just, this is a lot to figure out. I'm trying to focus on Ethan right now, and I'm not sure how everything else is going to work." Grace's response was immediate. "I understand. Take your time. Just know that we're here if you need anything." I put down the phone, feeling unsettled. Grace's words were meant to be comforting, but they only served to remind me of the complicated web we were all tangled in. How was I supposed to navigate co-parenting with Jeff when Grace was in the picture too? Would I ever be able to truly move on from Jeff when he was so intricately involved in my life, not just because of Ethan, but because of Grace's persistent attempts to bridge the gap between us? As the weeks went by, I found myself increasingly preoccupied with these questions. Jeff continued to call and message regularly, and while I appreciated his involvement, it also kept the wound of our breakup fresh. I wanted to move on, to find peace with the situation, but every interaction with Jeff reminded me of what I had lost. One afternoon, my mom came over to help with Ethan. As she rocked him to sleep, she glanced at me with a concerned expression. "You look tired, sweetheart," she said gently. "I know being a new mom is exhausting, but is there something else going on? You can talk to me, you know." I sighed, rubbing my temples. It's everything, Mom. Jeff's trying to be involved, which is good, but it's also so hard. And then there's Grace. She keeps reaching out, trying to be supportive, but it just feels weird. I don't know how to handle it all." Mom nodded, her eyes full of understanding. It's a complicated situation, no doubt about it. But you need to focus on what's best for you and Ethan. If Jeff's involvement is making things harder for you emotionally, you need to set boundaries. It's okay to protect yourself too. Her words resonated with me. I had been so focused on making sure Jeff could be a part of Ethan's life that I hadn't stopped to consider how it was affecting me. I didn't want to shut Jeff out, but I also needed to find a way to move forward without constantly reopening old wounds. Later that evening, as I sat down to text Jeff, I decided to be honest with him. "Jeff, I appreciate everything you're doing to be involved with Ethan," I began, "but I need to be honest about how this is affecting me. It's hard to keep in touch so often when there's still so much unresolved between us. I'm trying to focus on Ethan and being the best mom I can be, but it's difficult when I'm constantly reminded of our past." I hit send, my heart pounding as I waited for his response. A few minutes later, his reply came in. "I'm sorry, I didn't realize it was making things harder for you," he wrote. "I don't want to make this any more difficult than it already is. I'll give you some space if that's what you need. But please know that I'm here if you ever want to talk, or if there's anything I can do for Ethan." I breathed a sigh of relief. Jeff's willingness to give me space was exactly what I needed. I replied with a simple, "Thank you, Jeff. I'll reach out when I'm ready." As the days turned into weeks, I found a new sense of peace. With Jeff taking a step back, I was able to focus on bonding with Ethan and settling into my new role as a mother. The quiet moments with my son became the highlight of my days, his tiny fingers wrapping around mine, his soft coos and little smiles lighting up my world. I still thought about Jeff, of course, but with the space I had asked for, the sharp sting of our past began to dull. I found myself thinking less about what might have been and more about what was in front of me. This beautiful, innocent baby who needed me to be strong for him. One afternoon, as I was walking through the park with Ethan, I ran into an old friend from high school, Mark. We had dated briefly during our senior year, and while nothing serious had ever come of it, we had remained on friendly terms. He had moved away after college, and I hadn't seen him in years, so it was a surprise to see him back in town. "Wow, it's been forever," Mark said with a grin, his eyes lighting up as he looked at Ethan in the stroller. "Is this your little one?" "He's adorable," I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through me at the sight of an old friend. "Yeah, this is Ethan," I said, reaching down to adjust the blanket over my son. "He's about 3 months old now." "Congratulations," Mark said sincerely. "You look great. Motherhood suits you." We spent the next half hour catching up, talking about our lives since high school and what had brought Mark back to town. It was easy and comfortable, a reminder of simpler times before everything had become so complicated. As we said our goodbyes, Mark hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "Hey, would you maybe want to grab coffee sometime?" he asked, his tone casual but hopeful. "It'd be nice to catch up more, and I'd love to hear more about your little guy." I was caught off guard by the offer. It had been so long since I had thought about anything other than being a mom, and the idea of going out for coffee with someone, especially someone like Mark, felt both exciting and intimidating. "I'd like that," I said, surprising myself with the honesty in my voice. "Let's do it." As I walked away from the park, a small smile played on my lips. For the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope for the future. It wasn't that I was ready to jump into anything new, far from it. But the simple act of reconnecting with an old friend, of considering the possibility of life beyond the complicated mess with Jeff, was enough to lift my spirits. That evening, as I rocked Ethan to sleep, I found myself thinking about the future, not just mine, but ours. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a while, I felt like I could handle it. With Jeff giving me the space I needed and a support system of friends and family around me, I was beginning to see that there could be happiness beyond the heartache. And maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for new beginnings after all.